Hello everyone, we are ready for chapter 36 of The Treasure Hunter's Tale. There was nowhere to run to, so they stood their ground. There at the mouth of the cave they could see the outline of the beast. It was flapping with a hovering motion and roaring into the cave. They could see it take a deep breath in. "Fire! Fire! Everybody down!" yelled Set Free, who had seen this behaviour before. The whole group hit the ground as flames tore through the cave and licked at the pile of bones. Thankfully, the men, for we shall call Freddie and Johnny men now, for they had shown themselves to be so in their bravery, were just far enough into the cave that the full force of the flames didn't reach them, but they still got very scorched. Ears to Hear crawled towards the water where the stalactite was, and the others quickly followed. They doused themselves in the refreshing pool, and then, as one man, decided to take the risk of going further in rather than trying to get out. And so poor Freddie had to brave the dreaded swim under the stalactite again, but this time it was urgent. They had to get away from the dragon and its flames, and this seemed the only way. On the other side, Ears to Hear and Freddie quickly located the glowing cave that they had found the last time and motioned everyone inside. "Well, that was a close one," breathed Ears to Hear, "but we'll be safe here." "For how long?" asked Johnny and Freddie. "For as long as we need it," said Set Free. "Once the dragon gets fed up of waiting for us, it's bound to fly off and hunt, and then we'll make good our escape." "Meanwhile, Fred, do you remember this place?" sighed Ears to Hear. "Do I?" said Freddie, leaning back and breathing heavily. "I was thinking the salt from the walls might help us." Freddie sat up. "How?" "Well, salt doesn't burn, so if we can coat ourselves in the salt, we might make ourselves sort of flame-proof." Freddie looked intrigued and was about to start testing the theory when Set Free chimed in. "It would be great and would definitely help if we didn't have to go under the water to get back through to the dragon's cave," he said, shaking his head. "Sorry, chaps, but there it is." Everyone had a rest while they got their breath back and decided what was to be done next. "If only there was another way out of here," sighed Johnny, "so we could regroup. I wager we are too far in the cave now to be able to tell when the dragon leaves again." "You're right," said Set Free. "Dragons leave their caves very quietly so as not to alert their prey, so we wouldn't know it unless we were able to observe it." He leant back on the salty walls of the cave. "In all my days of dragon hunting, I have never been actually trapped inside its lair before. I'm not sure what we are to do, but we had better think fast." Johnny stretched out. "Well, looks like we're spending the night here then," he said. "That's it!" Set Free snapped his fingers and jumped up. Everyone looked at him in hopefulness, as he really looked like he had solved their issue. "We wait until night," he said. "All dragons hunt at night, so that will be the best time to escape." "But how will we know when that is?" Just then they heard a massive roar, then another, then another. Then there was a yelping sound, then a crash, and then silence. "Now what?" said Ears to Hear. "I think one of us needs to go and take a look at what caused that noise." Johnny had been looking at his sword, turning it this way and that. "Do you think we could use our swords to create a sort of looking spyglass?" He held up his sword to demonstrate how he could remain by the hilt, but stick the tip out enough so that he could see around the corner. "Genius," said Set Free. "You know, Johnny, when all this is over, we could use someone like you on our hunting team if you're interested." Johnny smiled. "Thanks, sir, but I'll see how the rest of the hunt goes first, if you don't mind." Set Free grinned. "I understand," he said. Johnny picked up his sword and had a go at looking out into the rest of the cave from the safety of the salt cave. It worked pretty well. There was the stalactite, and beyond that he could see the daylight coming through the mouth of the cave. "All clear," he called, and the rest of the group followed. Back through the freezing water they went, back under the stalactite. Freddie really hoped that would be the last time he had to do that, and back out into the now very scorched cave. While all this had been going on, Mr. Saved by Grace and Mr. Discover the Truth had settled themselves down for a long wait. They had made a shelter so they were protected from the wind, but also not as visible from above by an angry dragon. They had felt like young boys again, having to build a shelter. Once they were settled, they began to talk in low whispers. "What did you think of those two men?" asked Mr. Saved by Grace. "Freddie seemed to think they weren't to be trusted." "I confess I was so focused on helping them and making sure that beast wasn't returning that I didn't really pay that much attention," said Mr. Discover the Truth. "Freddie said something about their armour looking different. At the time it didn't seem to matter, but now I'm not so sure. Come to think of it, every piece of armour that the king has given looks the same, so why was their armour different?" "Maybe it wasn't the king's," said Mr. Saved by Grace seriously. The two men looked at one another. "And we have just willingly sent them to the town." They looked very concerned. Part of them wanted to jump up and run after them to stop them, or at least question them further, but they knew they had a duty to the men in the cave, so they stayed in position. each praying that the dragon would show up soon so that they could get it over and done with and make their way with all speed back. Just then there was a dark shadow overhead and the sound of beating wings. The men crept out of their shelter to see the tips of the dragon's wings just over the crest of the hill. It was flapping them in a way that helped it hover in place. Next, they saw the horrifying red glow of the flames. Both men looked at one another in panic. Was that it? Was that the end of those brave young men in just one breath? They carried on watching, but they noticed the beast was still hovering. It was flapping its huge, scaly wings. Suddenly it flew straight up into the air. Higher and higher it went, then looped over and came screaming down. As it came towards the cliff once more, they could see it take in another big breath. "It's taking in extra air to make a bigger flame," yelled Mr. Saved by Grace. "It must have realised it missed the first time," yelled back Mr. Discover the Truth. Both men immediately went into action, for they knew the others were trapped inside, and a bigger flame could potentially bring the cave ceiling crashing down. They stood up so that they could unsheathe their swords and ran to the edge of the cliff. Mr. Saved by Grace threw his sword like a spear, but the sword glanced off the dragon's flank. "We need more force!" yelled Mr. Saved by Grace, looking desperately at his friend. Mr. Discover the Truth nodded and looked down at his sword. On the hilt was carved, "Be strong and very courageous," in gold lettering. The gold flashed as he turned it. He knew what he must do. He gripped his brother's shoulder in a farewell grasp, then took a running jump and leapt off the cliff at the beast with his sword outstretched. The sword went straight into the side of the dragon and hit its heart. The dragon let out a roar and then a yell and fell like a stone. Mr. Saved by Grace yelled after his brother as courageous Mr. Discover the Truth fell with the beast. Mr. Saved by Grace's heart was thumping in his chest. He watched helplessly as his friend and companion fell down, down, down. Then there was a depressing thud, and then silence.